Hi, it's Patrick Hutzel from IntensiveCareHotline.com, where we instantly improve the lives for families of critically ill patients in intensive care so that you can make informed decisions, have peace of mind, real power, real control, and so that you can influence decision-making fast, even if you're not a doctor or a nurse in intensive care. This is another episode of Your Questions Answered, and in last week's episode I answered another question in this series of questions from my client Steve. And the question last week was part 1 of my 73-year-old mum had a stroke and is intubated in intensive care. She can't come off the ventilator and the breathing tube. Can she have a tracheostomy and go home and have intensive care at home? And that was part 1 of this series of questions that I answered last week. You can check out last week's episode by clicking on the link below this video. In this week's episode of Your Questions Answered, I want to answer the next question from my client Steve, which are excerpts from phone and email counseling and consulting sessions with me. And the question this week is part 2 of my 73-year-old mom had a stroke and is intubated in intensive care. She can't come off the ventilator and the breathing tube. Can she have a tracheostomy and go home and have intensive care at home? And again, this week is part 2 of this series of questions. Steve continues with his mother's situation as follows. Steve writes, "Hi Patrick. So given that the ICU doctors don't want to do a tracheostomy for my mum, I want her to get into another hospital and into another ICU, changing from public ICU to private ICU. One hospital said no to taking my mother, and after I found out, I raced down to the hospital and we had a meeting. I outlined all of my concerns about all the negative questions directed to my mum and how it was distressing her, etc. And that we wanted her moved and that we still don't understand why she hasn't been given a tracheostomy after more than 2 weeks on the ventilator and the breathing tube. So we had a meeting. He said he called the director of the ICU and he said no, because she's a long-term ventilator patient. Then he said it's the same specialists in the private ICU there anyway, so it would be the same care. That's all he really had to say about moving my mum from public hospital to private hospital. I found the ICU consultant this week slightly more pleasant to deal with than his predecessors, but nevertheless he still echoed the same sentiments. He said he would try to arrange the second opinion and that he was going to contact the respiratory support service at another hospital, although he said that they probably wouldn't take her due to her age. But he said he'd speak to them nonetheless. I'm not really satisfied with his answer about the ICU at the private hospital, so I will call them tomorrow myself and follow that up. Other than that, there is not much to report. They will still try to wean my mother off the ventilator. The doctor still said tracheostomy isn't in quote-unquote her best interest right now, and he still reiterated her low chance of a good prognosis given that the stroke affected her respiratory center. I did ask whether he can 100% say that it will never get better. He couldn't answer that and said he would ask the stroke specialist. Anyway, let me know your thoughts, and they are much appreciated as always. Thank you from Steve." Now, before I get into my response, if you want one-on-one counseling and consulting with me personally, go and check out the options at the top of the website. Click on the link and select from the options that work best for you. So here is my response. "Hi Steve, thank you for the update. I do believe that with everything that's happening, your mother would be much better off in a private hospital rather than in a public hospital where resources are limited. Your mother will need time to come off the ventilator, and a public hospital is often so stretched for ICU beds that they don't want to give your mother the time to wean her off the ventilator and the breathing tube. It's been over 2 weeks now and she needs to have a tracheostomy, period. If they have tried according to the guidelines how to wean a patient off the ventilator and the breathing tube and it failed, they will need to do a tracheostomy. You can check out the guidelines by clicking on the article and the video that I put below this video and the written version of the blog. You can check out how to wean a critically ill patient in intensive care off the ventilator and the breathing tube. If they have tried everything to the best of their abilities to get your mother off the ventilator and the breathing tube and she still has high carbon dioxide levels and she doesn't have the respiratory drive to breathe by herself, she needs a tracheostomy, full stop. You see, the intensive care unit has no interest in investing the physical as well as the emotional resources that it takes to get your mother a tracheostomy and buy her much needed time. A tracheostomy often buys people time to recover, and even if they can't fully recover, it gives them the opportunity to prolong life, especially if they're wanting to live. Your mother has clearly stated that she wants to live, and you also know that you want her at home with intensive care at home, which makes perfect sense to me. It would also help the intensive care unit to free up one of their precious, expensive and in-demand intensive care bed that costs about $5,000 to $6,000 per bed day. Intensive care at home can be done for $2,500 per day, and it improves your mother's quality of life very quickly because she can leave ICU. As you would know by now, there is no quality of life in intensive care. The intensive care team wants to empty the ICU bed, and they want to do it by basically quote-unquote selling you and your mother on a withdrawal of treatment against your and against your mother's wishes. They argue that your mother won't have any quality of life in the future, which may or may not be accurate. And besides, it's not up to the intensive care team, but it's up to your mother and to you to decide what quality of life is acceptable. What's happening here I have witnessed over and over again in nearly 20 years intensive care nursing experience in 3 different countries, where I have also worked as a nurse unit manager for over 5 years in intensive care, and it usually unfolds as follows. A critically ill patient comes to intensive care, is in an induced coma, ventilated and has a perceived poor prognosis. The intensive care team paints a negative picture and is all doom and gloom, and the negativity helps them with positioning your mother's diagnosis and prognosis in a negative light, and it helps them with quote-unquote selling you on an end-of-life situation, which is often the quickest way to empty their ICU bed that they so desperately need for the next patients that are already waiting for that bed. This strategy works for the intensive care team with 99% of the families in intensive care who don't make informed decisions, who don't have peace of mind, and neither do they have control, power, or influence. Families in intensive care don't know how to deal with this overwhelming situation, and they don't know how to manage and challenge the negativity and the doom and gloom. Therefore, they often give in, so to speak. You are different already, and you have learned very quickly that pushing back will give you results, and hiring somebody like me for one-on-one counseling and consulting and advocacy will give you leverage and tremendous negotiating power. We have shown that over and over again with our clients and get them results very quickly. In your particular situation, and because you are in a big metropolitan area in Australia, and because your mother is in a public hospital, the best way forward is to go to a private intensive care unit. You have already shared that your mother has private health cover, therefore all she needs is a referral to a private intensive care unit, and they will take over and do the tracheostomy, and that'll give her all the options she needs. Recovery in intensive care after an induced coma and stroke takes time, and recovery after a critical illness is a marathon and not a sprint. Nobody will ever be able to tell you if your mother can fully recover and how long it'll take. However, only time will tell. If your mum's respiratory center is affected, she will continue to have high carbon dioxide levels, and because of that, she may be getting confused. Currently, they can control and manage those high carbon dioxide levels by increasing her pressure support on the ventilator, and in the long run, she will need a tracheostomy in order to breathe adequately on a ventilator. Your next steps at this stage are to look at the guidelines how to wean a patient in intensive care off the ventilator and the breathing tube, And also keep calling private intensive care units and keep negotiating with the intensive care team about a tracheostomy. Again, it's been over 2 weeks now, and a tracheostomy is way overdue because taking out the breathing tube and not ventilating her could potentially kill your mother, maybe not instantly, but after a few days. Also, do not go into any family meetings with the intensive care team without knowing about their agenda. I know you have been in family meetings with the intensive care team in the past, and I know you have been standing your ground, but if your mother's situation is stalling and they are adamant of wanting to take the breathing tube out without doing a tracheostomy and in essence kill your mother, you should not engage in any more discussions beyond what your wishes are. Do not take no for an answer. And again, I have put all the guidelines in when and why to do a tracheostomy. Again, you can find them in the written version of this blog below this video. And if you're watching this on YouTube, click on the link below this video. It'll get you all to all of our resources on our website. So once your mother has the tracheostomy, she should be able to go home with intensive care at home, and she can recover at home. And even if your mother is approaching her end of life, she'll still be so much better off at home. I hope that helps for now, Steve. Keep asking for what you want and do not take no for an answer. Keep encouraging your mother to fight because it looks like that's what she wants for now anyway. I'll talk to you again tomorrow. And how can you become the best advocate for your critically ill loved one? How can you make informed decisions, get peace of mind, control, power, and influence quickly whilst your loved one is critically ill in intensive care? You get to that all-important feeling of making informed decisions, get peace of mind, control, power, and influence when you download your free instant impact report now by entering your email below. In your free instant impact report, you learn quickly how to make informed decisions, get peace of mind, real power and real control, and how you can influence decision making fast whilst your loved one is critically ill in intensive care. Your free instant impact report gives you in-depth insight that you must know whilst your loved one is critically ill or is even dying in intensive care. Sign up and download your free instant impact report now by entering your email below. In your free instant impact report, you learn how to speak the secret intensive care language so that the doctors and the nurses know straight away that you are an insider and that you know and understand what's really happening in intensive care. In your free report, you will also discover how to ask the doctors and the nurses the right questions, discover the many competing interests in intensive care, and how your critically ill loved one's treatment may depend on those competing interests. How to eliminate fear, frustration, stress, struggle, and vulnerability even if your loved one is dying. You get 5 mind-blowing tips and strategies helping you to get on the right path to making informed decisions, get peace of mind, control, power, and influence in your situation. You'll get real-world examples that you can easily adapt to your critically ill loved one's situation. How to stop being intimidated by the intensive care team and how you will be seen as equals. You'll get crucial behind-the-scenes insight so that you know and understand what's really happening in intensive care and how you need to manage doctors and nurses in intensive care, and it's not what you think. Thank you for tuning into this week's Your Questions Answered episode, and I'll see you again in another update next week. Make sure you also check out our blog section for more tips and strategies, or simply send me an email to support@intensivecarehotline.com with your questions. Or you can call me. Find international phone numbers on the top of the website. Also, check out our ebook section where you get more ebooks, videos and audio recordings, and where you also get one-on-one counseling and consulting with me via Skype, over the phone or via email by clicking on the counseling and consulting tabs on the top of the website. This is Patrick Hutzel from IntensiveCareHotline.com, and I'll see you again next week in another update.